All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Bob Griffin, and as the commercial goes, I am an IBMer. I have the pleasure of introducing the next session, TSA Rethinking Aviation Security in the Post-Bin Laden Era. Moderating this morning's session is Mr. Brian Ross. Most of us are familiar with Brian's body of work, but for those of you that are not, let me say a few words about Brian. Brian is one of the most honored and respected journalists in the country. As ABC News Chief Investigative Correspondent, he reports extensively for World News with Diane Sawyer, Nightline, Good Morning America, and 2020, as well as for ABC News Radio and The Blotter on abcnews.com. Mr. Ross joined ABC News in July of 1994. Mr. Ross's work has been repeatedly honored with the most prestigious awards in journalism, including 2, and this is very cool, 6 DuPont Awards, 5 Peabody Awards, 5 Polk Awards, 5 awards from the Overseas Press Club, 12 Emmys, and 3 Edward R. Murrow Awards. Prior to joining ABC News, Mr. Ross worked for 20 years at NBC, reporting to NBC Nightly News and reporting for NBC Nightly News and Dateline NBC. Before I turn it over to Brian, as a person that on average flies more than 250,000 miles a year, I would like to publicly thank Administrator Pistole for his dedication and the dedication of his organization to their mission. And on a personal note, I would like to thank him for TSA Pre. Because outside of all the wonderful benefits that come with the program, I am no longer self-conscious when I arrive at the airport as to if I am wearing socks that match or if they have holes in them. So, on that note, please let me welcome Mr. Brian Ross.
Thank you very much. So it was 3 years ago this month that John Pistole was confirmed as the head of the TSA. This was his reward from a country he had served as 26 years at the FBI. He was asked one day to leave the most prestigious law enforcement organization in the world and take over a group of 61,000 individuals who were famous for searching grandma and 2-year-old children in their diapers. In those 3 years, he has made a remarkable difference. John, we're in a group of people here who applauded when they heard about the PreCheck. Still, there are many who didn't go through that, but there really is no terrorist in this group. Why should they have to go through the same procedures as everybody else, and what are you going to do about that?
Yeah, so that's the whole basis, and thank you for that reception, and Clark and Walter and all the folks here at the Aspen Institute and this outstanding staff. Thank you for the hospitality here. Well, and so on that, I am pleased to announce today a major expansion of our TSA PreCheck program, which will allow even the infrequent flyers to sign up online and to pay a fee, $85 for 5 years, to qualify for TSA PreCheck in the existing 40 airports we're in and a number of other airports later on. So that's our way of dealing with risk-based security. Say, let's get away from the one-size-fits-all and let's focus on those that we can pre-screen, that is, everybody in this room, and those who are willing to share just a little bit of information, and say, yeah, let's do that pre-screening so we can expedite your physical screening at the checkpoint because we have a high confidence that you are not a terrorist.
Well, you're making some news today with this. Tell me a little bit about how it's going to work, when does it begin, and how do you sign up? Everybody wants to know that.
Okay, so that's the good news about being able to do this. So it's very similar to the Customs Border Protection's Global Entry Program, which many of you are familiar with and part of. This is a domestic version of that, and so what you will be able to do later this fall is go online and submit the application and then go to an enrollment site to do not even an interview, just provide fingerprints. We can confirm who you are. And then within 2 to 3 weeks, that whole process, assuming you go in for your fingerprints, then you will be issued a known traveler number. So you won't have a card like in Global Entry because that would cost more. We're trying to keep costs down here. You'll be given a known traveler number, so when you make your reservations, you will then put that known traveler number in your profile and that for your airline, and then that will enable you to be identified as a low-risk passenger. Now that being said, you'll be able then to go to a dedicated lane. Again, we're in 40 airports, the 40 busiest airports right now. Go to a dedicated lane and keep your shoes on, which is not a big thing in Europe or the other places around the world, but obviously here it is. Keep your belt on, keep a light jacket on, keep your laptop and your water in your carry-on bag. And so those are some of the benefits, and that's what we're trying to do to expand the DHS, TSA, known trusted traveler programs.
John, these are, in dealing with the public, no agency other than the IRS interacts more with the public or is beloved less, really, because of the long lines and what is often regarded as a hassle. You've made a lot of efforts to try to trim that back, and let's just talk a little bit about this.
Oh, okay.
You said you could take this on a plane,
Yeah.
and there was a huge backlash to that from flight attendants who said, this is a threat, we don't want it. What went into your thinking, and why did you change course?
Yeah, so as part of a risk-based, intelligence-driven approach, what we've been trying to do is identify what the highest risks, what the highest threats are, and how we can best buy down, manage, or mitigate risk, recognizing that we're not in the business of trying to eliminate risk. We are in the business of trying to manage and mitigate risk in a way that makes sense to promote the free movement of people and goods with the best security. Looking at the intelligence, we realized that there had been no attempts since 9/11 to hijack an aircraft, obviously coming to the U.S. There had been two, let's say, very amateurish incidents overseas in the last 12 years that knives had been involved in. People had using knives. And so the notion was, if we can focus on the highest risk, which we define as the non-metallic improvised explosive devices, whether it's something like this. And in fact, this water bottle represents one of the type of threats that we're looking at. So whether that's a liquid explosive or plastic explosive, if you look at this water bottle, I've drank about a third of it. If I take another sip, it gets down just to below the label here. And what we have found is whether it's liquid explosives or plastic explosives, something that's non-metallic. So they can go through a walk-through metal detector 1,000 times, such as Abdul Muttalib did in Schiphol Airport, Christmas Day 2009, walk through, and was not detected because he had that non-metallic ID concealed in his underwear. We have a short video clip here which shows the explosive power of something about this amount of explosives. This is a reenactment, or it's a demonstration of the explosives that was used on Christmas Day, a certain type of explosive, and about this amount. And what it shows, just on a sheet of aluminum to replicate the skin of an aircraft, this is the FBI that did this, and shows what that can do just on the ground, not at pressurized cabin 35,000 feet. So it's just a 15-second video here. So what this shows is the challenge that we're trying to face, and that is the highest risk that we're dealing with. If somebody gets on a plane with one of those, they have bad intent. I mean, that's the bottom line. What we found is we find about 2,100 of these every day.
Every day?
Every day. And
you confiscate them?
And no terrorist. That's not to say they can't be used by a disgruntled, inebriated, unbalanced passenger, whatever, and clearly, so I heard that loud and clear from people who are concerned about that. So I decided not to proceed with that. That was actually our 13th change that we'd made under risk-based security. And so this major expansion I'm announcing today is our 14th. So heard all the concerns about that and said, let's move away from that and move on with our other things to help us focus on this highest risk.
So is it your theory that the cockpit really now is so well protected that it would be impossible for anybody to get past that into the cockpit?
Well,
virtually impossible?
Well, I wouldn't even say that, Brian. What I would say, it is much more difficult, but what our federal air marshals, which are of course part of TSA, have done a lot of work with airlines and the Airline Pilots Association and things, is to look at ways that they could be exploited when the cockpit doors open just for a few seconds. Even with a secondary barrier, which is clearly a deterrent, it is possible, probably highly unlikely, But hopefully, we'll have some intelligence about that. So we've heard all these great presentations about the U.S. national security apparatus, and I see us, TSA, at one end of that continuum. So hopefully, just as we found with the 3 out of the 4 planes that have been targeted since Christmas Day, so we had the Christmas Day plot, we had the Yemen cargo plot of October 2010, which targeted 2 cargo planes, a FedEx plane and a UPS plane coming from Sana'a to Chicago. Fortunately, that was disrupted by intelligence. John Brennan from the White House called me, said, do you have the tracking numbers? Have you heard of this? No, that was news. We passed that on to our international counterparts. United Arab Emirates and the UK tracked those packages down. And then, of course, we had this next-gen device, which was disrupted last May. Again, an intelligence coup, because Ibrahim al-Siri, the bomb maker, who's made all these, and also made the bomb that he gave to his younger brother in an assassination attempt against Mohammed bin Nayef, he gave that to the putative terrorist, who gave him instructions to get on a plane from a safe airport and fly to the U.S., blow himself up over the U.S. That was last May, May of 12. Fortunately, that terrorist was actually a double agent. And so it's intelligence gleaned from all these great agencies, departments on the other end, and then hopefully we will be informed about these plots before they get to U.S. soil or U.S. 450 airports that we provide security in.
If that bomb last year, which some have called Underwear 2, was a similar device, if that had not been given to a double agent, but to an actual al-Qaeda operative, would your machines in Europe have picked it up?
So the question's in Europe, possibly. So
Possibly.
possibly. So there's.
But it was pretty good, wasn't it?
It was very good. And let me just describe it briefly. Some of you are aware, but it was a next-gen device, if you will, in 3 respects. New and improved, if you will, from the underwear device of Christmas Day 2009. So it was a new type of explosive that we had never seen in either attempts in the U.S. or around the world by terrorists. So all of our explosive detection equipment, which screens over 1 million check bags every day just in the U.S., wasn't calibrated to detect that. So that was one thing. And all of our 800 bomb-sniffing dogs had not been trained, printed for that specific type of explosive, because there's a limited number of things you can detect, and that simply wasn't on our radar. So that's one. 2, it had a double initiation system, if you will, a redundancy, a backup, 2 syringes instead of 1. Abdul Muttalib, the assessment was that he either messed up or there was some design failure, so they made a second, Ibrahim al-Siri, again the bomb maker, made a second initiator to cause the device to go off. And then third, he encased this explosive in caulk, just typical bathroom, kitchen caulk that we have here, for the purpose of defeating what he thought would be explosive vapors that could be detected either by equipment or by bomb-sniffing dogs. So I say maybe.
Or likely.
So the question is, so how do we work with our foreign counterparts with over 275 airports that have nonstop service to the U.S. every day, passenger, and then a few more than that have cargo coming to the U.S. every day? How do we work with them to ensure the highest level of security to detect the most recent threats?
Well, you really have a twisted genius in Yemen who you haven't heard from again in a year, but doesn't mean it's not going to happen, right? That must be what you worry about every single day.
Yeah, I mean, that is our greatest threat. I mean, all the intel folks in here and everybody who gets that classified briefing every day knows that is a clear and present danger, and that they are looking for opportunities to exploit what they see vulnerabilities overseas. The good news is they see our security regimen, our layers of security here in the U.S., informed by our intelligence partners, both in the intel community and law enforcement community. They see that as a very difficult system to get into. And so they look at some of these foreign airports as less secure, more vulnerable, and that's the entry points that we are focused on most highly with our foreign partners.
But are you saying that just this amount of liquid could take down an aircraft?
That amount of liquid or plastic explosives is what resulted in that explosion, and clearly, again, at altitude 35,000 feet, pressurized cabin, that's going to blow a big enough hole, depending. Now, al-Siri gave his younger brother, I mentioned the assassination attempt, when his younger brother met with Mohammed bin Nayef, the Saudi head of security, they were about this far apart. And when he blew himself up, his body absorbed most of the blast. So MBN, as he's called, was injured, but not seriously. So there are a lot of variables in this process, but why risk it? Obviously, the last thing we want to make sure is nobody gets on an aircraft in the U.S., first and foremost, because that's their gold standard. That's what terrorists want to do. They want to show that we have spent billions and billions of dollars, 12 years, and we still can't stop them. That's what they want to do for the psychological aspects of terrorism. And so that's our first goal. And then secondly, and almost right there, is to work with our foreign partners, which we do on a daily basis, to inspect, to audit, and to, in some cases, capacity development. To say, I mean, I was in Yemen 5 days after the Yemen cargo plot in Sana'a to see what they were doing, their inspections, and obviously their capacity, question of their political will at the time. All those issues come into play as to how they are doing their screening of cargo, of passengers, and that's not even addressing the insider threat.
And that was the printer bomb, right?
Those are the two printer bombs, right?
And that even when they pulled the printers out in England, they didn't think it was a bomb. It was so well concealed.
Both in the UK and the UAE, two instances, we had to go back and say, no, look at it. They actually were able to pull the toner out and still say there's nothing there. The one instance, they had a bomb-sniffing dog go by, didn't alert. So yeah, we're dealing with a determined enemy who is innovative in his design, construction, concealment, and deployment of improvised explosive devices, bombs, and from a passenger side, those non-metallic ones, which, as we know, most places around the world don't have the advanced imaging technology, the body scanners, if you will. And so, just as Abdul Patel did Christmas Day, they can go through that walk-through metal detector 1,000 times and never alarmed.
So has Al-Asiri trained others, or is are we just one drone strike away from being a lot safer?
Yeah, so that's the question. There is intel out there that he has unfortunately trained others, and there's a lot of effort to identify those folks.
And do you today, based on your morning briefing, is there something coming?
Well, so so you have the strategic intelligence and then the tactical, and obviously we don't have the tactical as we did with the toner cartridges or the next-gen device last year. And so what we do is, again, focus that today may be the day. The question is where, how, we know why.
So that is every day.
Yeah, that's an everyday, that's why TSA exists. I mean, we were created obviously 2 months after 9/11 to make sure that terrorists don't do something like that again, and that's our reason for existence. And so this whole notion of risk-based security is simply to say, even though we used a one-size-fits-all approach when we stood up in 2002, because anybody could be a terrorist, and we've got a great poster of the faces of terrorism, and there's probably 20, maybe 22, 24 faces of terrorists on this poster, and it shows people from Jihad Jain to Eric Rudolph to Jose Padilla or Padilla, depending on who you talk to. Just a lot of terrorists. And the interesting thing about it, all but 3 are U.S. persons. So 3 are foreigners, non-U.S. persons. The rest of them are U.S. persons. And so this notion that you can identify terrorists by how they look, the notion of profiling, obviously we can't use that, but that stand-up was necessary, so everybody was treated as if they were terrorists, so everybody in here, and just the scope, let's say there's 300 of us here in this room, on a daily basis, it may be that if everybody here went through security, had a positive experience, maybe just knocked it out of the park and it was great, and everybody went through TSA PreCheck and everybody's happy. Some airports they call it the happy lane, and so that's a good thing. That's good, but whatever. But part of this is, so how do we deal with just the scope of things? So 300 of us here, if you took that notion that, well, maybe 1 or 2 of us didn't have a positive experience, multiply this group times 6,000 conferences going around, that's how many people we screen every day, about 1.8 million people. So the notion that literally every single person will be 100% satisfied in terms of their security experience, to me it's amazing that we don't have more complaints or issues. But RBS, what we call it, risk-based security, with apologies to Royal Bank of Scotland, to the Europeans here, internally we just call it RBS. The whole notion is how can we move away from that one-size-fits-all to use information and then all the categories of persons that we can look at.
You have been defined by the anecdotes that we see in the Drudge Report and elsewhere when a little child is searched or grandma searched.
Yeah.
Why do you do that? Why do you search kids?
Well, that's one of the things that was the question. So we know from intelligence that terrorists could use kids. We know the drug couriers, for those on the law enforcement side, have used kids or the elderly. But what we've done, as I mentioned, these 14 policy changes, is look at that and say, what is our confidence that they are probably not or likely not to be. So over a year ago, we changed the policy. So for those of you who or know somebody 75 and older, or have children, grandchildren who are 12 and under, you know you can keep your shoes on. So that's something that may, again, not sound like a big deal, but this year, over 45 million Americans will be able to keep their shoes on by going through TSA security because they're either in TSA PreCheck or they're going through some other type of expedited physical screening because of age, or, for example, if they're active duty military, and we're expanding that later this year to reserve and others. If you have a top secret security clearance, TSSCI clearance, again, it's not a guarantee. Look, I was at the FBI at the same time Robert Hansen. We know about Major Hassan, so there's no guarantees, but it's just like no guarantees in life. So we get up in the morning, we decide to get out of bed, something bad may happen, but there's opportunity cost by not getting out of bed. So that's the whole notion of risk-based security.
Could you go farther? There really hasn't been a terrorist you've caught in the security line. Are you doing too much? And as a journalist, I'm relieved of the burden of trying to be consistent, so I can ask on both ways here.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Well, so that's, where's the balance? And so that's something we're working toward. For example, pilots and flight attendants, the flight crew every day, you know, in the past, we have been patting them down or looking for prohibited items, and yet they're in charge of the aircraft. And if when I was with the FBI, I was an assistant special agent in charge in Boston in 1999, and Egypt Air 990 crashed off the coast, JFK to Cairo flight, and we, along with the Navy and Coast Guard, others, did all the salvage operations looking for the forensics of why that plane crashed and 230 plus souls lost. We didn't find any forensics, and it wasn't until later that another government agency learned through intelligence collection that it was a co-pilot who put the flight down in a suicide attempt and was successful. And so my question to our TSA folks when I came over 3 years ago was, so how much physical screening would it take to detect what's in that person's head? Because and we don't have any equipment that does that, by the way, so no mind-reading scans out there just to disabuse any of that.
Just yet.
Just yet. We're working on that. And there's some great industry folks here who could maybe help us in that regard.
Big contracts available.
Yeah. So the notion, it's what's in the pilot's hands, the yoke of the aircraft, and what's in their mind, what's the intent. And so 175,000 pilots and flight attendants every week go through what we call known crew member in our busiest airports. So it's an identity-based screening. Now, they may smuggle drugs on, they may have a prohibited item on, but if they're not planning to take out the aircraft, then that helps us in terms of facilitating. We don't have to spend time doing the physical screening of them, and it facilitates their moves, and they don't have to cut in front of everybody, in front of us while we're in line. So it's that type of thing that we're always looking for ways to expand, and that's the notion of this announcement about expanding TSA PreCheck.
Aviation clearly is the biggest threat, but as the transportation security agency, you have other areas that you keep an eye on.
We do.
Rail, and for instance, we were reminded with the accident in Quebec what could happen with a very bad train wreck. Is that of concern to you?
Well, it is from the standpoint of what we are aware of worldwide. And of course, whether you look at the Madrid bombings of March of 2004, 911 days after 9/11, was there something to that? The Madrid, the London, the two bombings, 7/7/05, and then the second attempt 2 weeks later. And then all the rail attacks in India, Pakistan, some in Russia, and around the world. That whole notion of the open architecture of a passenger rail. I mean, you get on Amtrak, that's one of the beauties of getting on passenger rail, limited security protocols, vice that at the airport. That open architecture, though, creates opportunities for terrorists to exploit. So we've been very fortunate here in the U.S. There's no intel to say that they're currently being targeted here in the U.S., but we know that that is something that is a challenge. So we work in a partnership with transit authorities, for example, Amtrak police, who have the primary responsibility to prevent, detect, deter. But we work with them in terms of whether it's training, it has been funding, that's been affected obviously with budget issues, perhaps canines and things like that to work as a force multiplier for them to augment their resources and to do it in a partnership and to simply focus on those things that we see as possible threats.
You've touched on it, but how important to you is the feed you get from the intelligence community? And in light of Ed Snowden's revelations and the debate over the NSA, how important is that to you on a day-to-day basis? Do you see it directly?
Oh, absolutely. So it's critical, and that's frankly one of the things that I was suspect about when I was at the Bureau. Of course, getting the PDB every day and looking at the Presidential Daily Brief and just seeing that innermost information about the whole spectrum of things. I wondered when I got to TSA how that would be. I've been very pleasantly surprised to see the robustness and the access that TSA has to all the information as it relates to transportation security worldwide. And obviously that partnership with the intelligence community, with law enforcement, with the 800,000 state and local police officers, sheriff's deputies, in the 18,000 departments around the country, that information is all fed into our morning brief to say, yeah, here's what the threats are, here's what they're thinking, here's what their techniques, their tactics, their protocols, all those things that help inform us as to what we need to be doing.
There was a suggestion from Richard Barrett in the last panel, and others have talked about it, that maybe counterterrorism shouldn't be given the priority it's given. Are you prepared to back off a little bit on that?
Of course, that's a policy issue that my job is to help lead an agency that provides transportation security. So as administration and Congress decide on priorities, I will deal with whatever resources I'm given and the mandate that I'm given.
How do you give yourself, what grades do you give yourself now, 3 years after taking over an agency with 61,000 employees, many of them among the lowest paid employees in the entire federal government, who were hired in a rush right after 9/11, stood up very quickly with lots of problems, which I'm sure you know better than any of us. How do you give yourself grades? What is your report card?
I would give TSA and myself a solid B plus maybe on a good day. We're kind of like, I think perhaps like the stock market. So some days you're up, some days you're down. You try to look at the long-term trend, and I think, now if there's a big sell-off today, that's a bad analogy. But I think we're in a positive long-term trend, and perhaps to carry that another step further, we're maybe more like the NASDAQ, where we have some more volatile ups and downs versus the Dow 30, where they have the dividends and all that. Our dividends are a little bit difficult to assess, I guess, other than, well, we didn't have a terrorist attack today, so that's a good thing. But it's not like the FBI where you can announce the indictment of somebody or do a big roundup, or there's just not those opportunities to say, well, there's a good news story to offset that bad news story.
But you seem to have worked hard to bring some of the culture of the FBI, particularly the professionalism, to the TSA with strict rules. For instance, 400 TSA officers almost had been fired for stealing from passengers. And as you know, I did a story on ABC about that.
Right.
And the one person who took one of our iPads was fired almost immediately.
You did a story on that?
You may have heard about that. But so my question is that an ongoing problem? What did you discover when you arrived at TSA about the professionalism and the sense of commitment by the TSA officers?
I found that by and large, the TSOs, as we call them, Transportation Security Officers, are highly motivated, dedicated public servants. 25% of them, nearly, have former military experiences. They're veterans, which is one of the highest in the U.S. government. So we're proud of that, and they are proudly still serving is a notion they have. So the idea is, how can we bring some more rigor and process, if you will, to a large, disparate organization spread out around the country? So a couple things that we've done since I've been there is, one, to create an Office of Professional Responsibility that formalizes the disciplinary process. So if somebody in Topeka does something, misconduct, they will be treated similarly as the person at JFK or LaGuardia does. So that's one thing, and that's, I think, paid some dividends. So there's consistency and uniformity in the adjudication of misconduct. The other thing is we started a TSA Academy. For all those military or law enforcement, you know the value of an academy where you can establish a esprit de corps and just a sense of something larger than yourself. So of course we're not funded for this to build an academy, and I wouldn't suggest that in these budget times. But what we did is went to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, where a lot of federal law enforcement is trained, and some other state and locals. And if you go there, there's a little sign right now. It says TSA Academy. Hopefully someday it'll be a bigger sign. But we are training, the first tranche of training is for our supervisors, because if the supervisors get this paradigm shift of moving from one size fits all to risk-based intelligence driven, then they can help the frontline officers understand that. And similarly, they can translate what the TSOs are dealing with and provide it up. So we're over halfway through training our over 4,000 supervisors, and that's paying great dividends.
But it really isn't a career path, is it, to be a TSO and move into other law enforcement areas? Should it be? Would that be easier for you to recruit the best people, and would it make more sense?
Well, that's the Israeli model in many respects. As you know, you have the college graduates who have 2 years of military service, and then they, Ben Gurion there. That's not the model that we were given when we were stood up in 2002. And
why was that?
Well, I think it's just the rush to, we had a terrorist attack, we need to prevent it. Private industry didn't do the job, I mean, the way it was set up. So let's have a federal agency go in and do that. And so, as you mentioned, 50,000 people were hired in a year's time. Just a Herculean, the largest civilian deployment since World War II. So just a huge undertaking, and kudos to those folks who did that. And that being said, there is the question of, so do I do this for over 10 years now? And half of our officers, or I should say, the median tenure of our officers is 5 years. So we do have a number of people who have been with us the entire time. And a number of those do go on to other jobs. For example, CBP is one. Some try to become federal air marshals. There are different things, but it's not a formalized process. So they can become supervisors and work up. We do have several senior executives who started as TSOs, but we're working on that to make it more of a job progression, if you will.
And what is the biggest challenge for you in running such a huge organization? You essentially ran the FBI as deputy director, but but even bigger now.
I think the greatest challenge is making sure that our security protocols are being practiced in the way that helps us detect this type. I mean, that's first and foremost. We're a security agency. I mean, just like the Aspen Security Forum, security is our middle name, so we've got to get that right. But the key is, how do we do that in the most professional way that enables us to move to a risk-based approach? And again, very diverse workforce. Airports, I mean, those who flew in here to Aspen, Pitkin County, you realize that's one model of airport. And then you go to Atlanta Hartsfield, or you go to, like say, JFK O'Hare or LAX. It's a whole different airport. So the old adage in the industry is, if you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. So we have 450 of them here in the U.S. How do we provide a consistent, uniform approach to all 450, and then do that similarly in terms of our international colleagues?
Have you seen any attempt really to hijack an aircraft in this country?
No.
No, not a single one.
Not a single one. Not from a terrorist. I mean, there have been some disgruntled people. There's a guy a couple weeks, maybe a month ago, who was pounding on the cockpit door. He wanted to be let in because the flight attendants weren't listening to his complaint well enough. And so it had nothing to do with. So no attempts, and the flight attendants handled that very professionally. Got him seated, but no attempts.
So in a sense, are you defending against the last attack and not what could be the next attack?
Well, clearly we make sure that 9/11 isn't replicated. So that's a starting point, and shame on us if we do allow that because of whatever reasons. But no, clearly the threat has evolved significantly, and it is that non-metallic IED, largely coming from an overseas location, but that's why we have to be focused here.
Your boss, Secretary Napolitano, announced she's leaving. Mm-hmm. So let's make a little news. Are you going to be the next secretary?
So I've seen a number of names out there of very well qualified people, including some sitting in this room. And I'm not pointing at anybody in particular, Jane Harmon. And it would be an honor for me to serve with whomever is named the next secretary.
What's the challenge for the next secretary, do you think?
Well, I think to take a huge department, and I'll just say I think Jan Napolitano has done a great job of taking 22 disparate agencies with very different missions, but Homeland Security writ large, and establishing clear priorities and having everybody work toward it. I think that's the challenge for the next secretary, to come in and base off of that foundation and make some sense as to achieving efficiencies in a lean budget time, for one thing, and trying to achieve real outcomes as opposed to things that may just be notional. And there's a lot of things in that regard, but that's a challenge, I think.
Is it too big?
That's a policy question that I would defer to others on. I think there are pros and cons, and I saw those from the FBI in terms of dealing with DHS writ large, but I think each component, other than those created as part of the establishment of the department, so whether it's Coast Guard, Secret Service, ICE, CBP now, TSA, of course, was created a little bit before the department came about. Those each have unique qualities, characteristics, and missions that do blend, but I think that's the challenge, is how do you make that the most efficient operation?
And finally, before we get to questions, I'm sure there are lots of them, let me ask you about what I thought was the most glaring thing about aftermath of 9/11, the discovery of the lack of coordination between agencies. Your FBI, the CIA, and others were not really talking to each other for lots of different reasons.
Right.
How about an honest appraisal now, whether that has changed?
Oh, I think it's been sea change for the positive. So you're absolutely right. 9/11, there were lots of legal policy issues that prohibited, not only between the agency and the Bureau, but even within the Bureau. There was some discussion yesterday about maybe we need, like a Chinese wall to have some segregation between intelligence and law enforcement. Well, that was pre-9/11. That didn't work so well, and obviously there would be some iteration of that. But no, the FBI, and obviously been 3 years since I've been gone, but under Bob Mueller undertook a huge transformation of being that reactive top-level law enforcement agency to being an intelligence organization with law enforcement responsibilities. And just as an example, the thousands of counterterrorism investigations that the FBI has ongoing at any time, each one of those is an intelligence collection platform that is designed to collect intelligence to share with the rest of the community to prevent attacks. And in the course of that, they also have the law enforcement authorities and responsibilities. So if there is evidence gathered, that evidence is basically held in abeyance until the right time with all the partners, not only domestically, internationally, to say, yes, we will take that evidence, and working obviously with U.S. Attorney's offices and DOJ to say, when is the best time to pursue this? And it's clearly to prevent the next attack.
And now that you're outside that circle of the FBI, do you see what others may have seen before about what they regard as the FBI being
Absolutely. Yeah, so there's,
not that cooperative sometimes?
Yeah, and it really comes down to, so if there's an ongoing investigation, what can the FBI say? You can't go and testify or give an interview about all the details about the investigation, because that may prejudice investigation and a potential intel sharing or prosecution. So yeah, they're in a difficult position in that respect, because everybody's wanting transparency, and yet that's a difficult proposition when you have an ongoing either intelligence investigation or criminal investigation.
Okay, well, let's have a few questions from the audience.
Softballs are welcome.
Softballs. Hardballs are hit harder, right? Yeah. Who's got a mic? Over there? Yeah.
Administrator, you again. Thank you for sharing your thoughts this morning.
Your mic's not quite working. They're just going to... Is there an on-off switch? There we go. No, not better.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
We hear you.
Okay, very well.
And I can repeat the question if you want.
Okay.
No? No? Try again. There
Yes,
we go.
okay.
Very good.
Good technology here. So speaking of new technology, or at least technology that could help thwart some of these terrorist threats that we have. We know we had spoken the other evening about some of the advances in some of the screening equipment in terms of advances that the manufacturers are making, specifically in the airport security sector. You had just mentioned earlier about terrorists changing the game a little bit with some of their designs for explosives. So with some of the advances being made in some of the detection screening equipment, how soon do you feel that equipment will be deployed to try to counteract those measures? And over what time frame, perhaps, can you give us some feeling of when that might happen?
So internationally, there is a movement to acquire the latest generation, for example, advanced imaging technology, the AIT. Europe, which is deploying more and more of those. I think there are 6 countries now that have AIT, the body scanners, that are either in a pilot testing process or used as secondary. For example, London Heathrow, they don't use it in primary screening, but if you get selected to go through it, you don't have the option as you do here in the U.S. Here we give you the option. If you don't want to go through AIT, fine, you'll go through the walk-through metal detector and get a pat-down. But at Heathrow, for example, if you are selected, if you don't say yes, then you don't fly. So there's different policies and procedures. So we're seeing more and more, which I think is a good news story. We have the latest generation equipment here for both check bags and for explosive detection equipment, and at the checkpoint in terms of what we call AT2, Advanced Technology 2 X-ray, which gives you a number of different views and images and things to help detect explosives. So we're always interested in not only the next gen and spiral development, but we're interested in breakthrough technology that will say get us from this detection capability to this one without having go through these 2 or 3 phases. And frankly, in a challenging budget climate, something that TSA and DHS, S&T may have helped fund, we are being more and more challenged in that regard. So I would just say to the industry folks, work with us, but if you come up with that next generation technology, there is a worldwide market that is just watching what we do here in the U.S. And is very much interested not only in the next technology, but in RBS, risk-based security protocols, known trusted traveler programs, passenger identification, and all those things. So, yeah.
Let me follow up just one question on technology. Do you yet have equipment that can detect radioactive material coming in a large container on a ship? That actually works?
Yes, DHS does. Yes, the DHS has that, and whether at the ports, and so whether CBP or Coast Guard, the FBI also has some equipment in that regard. So, and obviously DoD, but domestically, yeah, that would there is equipment that is capable of doing that.
Okay, right back there with the mic.
Mike Kelly from Task. I've been a businessman watching DHS since the beginning, and clearly when a threat occurs, as a bureaucracy, and an interesting bureaucracy, it's somewhat slow to react. Can you just talk a little bit about how you're trying to be more agile in your responses?
Yes, and that's one of our keys of being a risk-based intelligence-driven organization, to take the latest intelligence, such as this next-gen IED that we mentioned, and going back to recalibrate our, we call it EDS, explosive detection systems that screen those 1.2 million checked bags every day. So using that as an example, if we didn't have that intelligence, we wouldn't have known to do that modification. Same thing with our bomb-sniffing dogs, which is an ongoing process. A few more challenges there. But that's the whole notion, is how can we be the most agile, nimble agency that can deploy intelligence-based solutions in real time? And so we need that intelligence on the front end. And I've got to say, we are probably not unique, but one of the few countries in the world where the organization that provides that frontline security receives that daily intel briefing, because most countries, whether it's on their security intel services or law enforcement services, they don't share that information, if they have it in the first place, with the airport police, the people who do the screening at the airports. Most of those are private companies hired by the airlines or the airports. So that's one of the advantages we have here, and that's why the bad guys see us as being more difficult to get into.
Yes. There we go.
Good morning, Tim Riley from IBM. Sir, thank you so much for your service, both in the FBI and now with TSA, and to add on to what my boss said, the PreCheck is awesome. But that being said, there's a proliferation of private contractors now that are taking over some of the TSA responsibilities, I understand, in 17 airports across the country. Are we as the traveling public in any additional danger? And also, doesn't that provide some huge complexities for you on that?
No additional danger. They have to follow the same policy, protocols, our standard operating procedures, and we supervise them at each airport. San Francisco, SFO being the largest, Kansas City the next largest, 7 small ones in Montana, and sampling around the country. Congress, when they created TSA, said they needed to have a carve-out for airports that would want to apply to have a privatized workforce. And over the 12 years, we have those 17 that you mentioned. So there hasn't been a rush to let's privatize. Virtually every airport director that I meet with, and I travel a fair amount going around checking on the workforce, town halls and things, say they like the way TSA runs things and they like the continuity and don't want to make changes. That being said, the law is that anybody who wants to come in and apply can do that. And so we process those applications. And if they are competitive, we assume they'll provide, when we assess, the same level of security and customer service. The issue has been in the past the cost, because it's always been higher, more expensive to have private security. Obviously, there's a profit margin built in that we don't have. And so that's the process we go through in analyzing those.
Next question there, and here we go. To your right there.
Brian Ware with Haystacks Technology. So I'm going to ask you another or comment about pre again. I love that I had the choice to volunteer my information and to give up some of my privacy to get through those lines faster and with less hassle. I'm really happy that I was able to do that. But I don't really have any idea what information you're using, when, how. Doesn't seem to be a whole lot of transparency on that. Can you shed a little light on that process?
Yeah, I can shed a little bit of light, but we run a delicate balance, such as we've heard yesterday in all the discussions about privacy and security. And so what we don't do is publish basically a list of here's what information we're using, because we don't want to provide a roadmap to the terrorist. So that being said, it is very limited compared to what that some people may think. And so there's obviously no credit data. Some people speculate about that. It's basic travel information that the airlines have because you've either provided that to them or you're a lead frequent flyer and you need that credit, if you will, to attain that status. So in general terms, that's what it is.
Next question, maybe, and while I wait for you to get the mic, give us a sense of where you think 5 years from now, what will TSA security be like at most airports?
I think the largest airports, the 40 TSA PreCheck, and let me just say, I encourage all of our senior leadership, anytime they talk about TSA PreCheck, to always say TSA PreCheck, because that's part of our intentional effort to do some rebranding of TSA. So not just to say PreCheck, we say that internally, but just as all of you marketing and folks know, I want people when they hear TSA PreCheck to think of something positive. So when they hear TSA, think of something positive as opposed to. So yeah, so and Luann Knipe, who is here, she's doing a great job. Where are you, Luann? She's over here doing a great job of that from that perspective. That being said, 5 years from now, I would say at least half of the traveling public to go through some form of expedited physical screening. And so you'll see different airport checkpoint configurations. So instead of 2 TSA PreCheck lanes, you may see, if there's 10 there, you may see 5 TSA PreCheck lanes. So the whole notion is as we grow this population, it's almost like a toll booth on the old toll booths on highways, toll roads, where they start off with 10 lanes and every one was staffed and you put cash in and all that. And then somebody figured out, oh yeah, we do a fast pass. So now somebody can zip through there. Well, then after a while, you may have 8 fast pass lanes. So it's a similar notion of how do we expand that? And it really depends on how many people sign up. I will say one other thing. We are working with third-party private companies on doing this same thing for people who are concerned, for example, about sharing any information with the government, given all the issues there, that they would pay a fee to a third-party vendor who would then do an assessment based on our criteria, our algorithms. They would do initial vetting. We'd do the final vetting, of course, and they basically say yes or no, they fit your criteria. And so we're working on that, and we'll see something on that down the road.
But half of the flying public, happy lanes for half of them.
My goal is to have actually that within a shorter time frame than 5 years.
Is that right? How soon?
So I try to manage expectations, under promise and over deliver, but I did share that goal with the Secretary last fall, and somebody decided to share that publicly, and so their goal is 25% by the end of this year, which is aggressive, but I think we can make it given this and some other things we're doing, and actually 50% by the end of calendar year 14,
Yeah.
so 18 months from now. So.
Just a quick question. Like everybody in the room, I think really appreciate the pre-check, and it definitely is a happy lane, not just for the passengers, but I think for the TSA people as well.
Yes.
As you expand this out and open it up more, what's your confidence level that you would be able to pick up somebody like the Boston brothers?
That's one of the challenges we have. So if they're not on anybody's radar, let's just take that as an assumption, not debating whether they were or not, obviously there's information. If they're not on anybody's radar, and if they have a next-gen non-metallic IED, that's our biggest challenge. So that's why we have multiple layers of security, including behavior detection officers, who are looking for suspicious behavior, not how a person dresses or whatever, but how they're behaving, and trying to assess what the possibility may be, and bomb-sniffing canines in many airports. So we have multiple layers of security, and not just at the checkpoint. Sometimes we'll have people on what we call the sterile side, at the gates. They've already been through security, and we may do a random check just to make sure that there's not an insider threat. Somebody's working on the sterile side who may provide something to a possible terrorist. So there's a number of things that we do, and more things, but I don't want to go too much more detail, just to say, how can we buy down that risk? How can we mitigate risk in the most efficient way?
Next, back there, and while you wait for the mic, give me a sense, who do you rely on? Is there one person who you think is really brilliant about this, who you go to sort of get sense of where to go, how to advance?
I would just say we have a terrific leadership team at TSA, and I rely on each of those assistant administrators.
And outside the government, though, is there
well, my
genius
wife,
your wife,
Kathy
yes,
Harper
right.
over here. Kathy, why don't you stand up? She's my soulmate, my walking buddy, and all those things. And
believe it's an anniversary?
well, so that's a great thing sharing with Clark. That the last 2 years I've had the privilege of being here speaking, and it coincided with our anniversary. This week they moved it up, and so it's next week. So we just missed it, but we still have a great time. 34 years here next week, so it's all good. So what was the question? Oh, relying on somebody. That's right.
No, is there somebody who really can see into the future even better than you, who you go to?
Oh, it's not me. Yeah, this is a team approach. So there's not one single individual, but it's a collective wisdom, and many of you have contributed to that, so I appreciate that. And look, if you have ideas, there are so many smart people in this room, and many people who go through airline security checkpoints. If you have ideas, please get those to us, because we're always looking for innovative, creative ideas that can provide the most effective security in the most efficient way. So that's a challenge.
Yes, sir.
Good morning. John Doyle with the 4G War Blog, and today I'm also stringing for Aviation Week. In the early days after 9/11, there was a strategy debate about the best way to protect America. One school said we need to have barriers, screening, guns, guards, gates. The other school said it was more important to push America's borders out to secure airplanes and ships coming in before they even entered U.S. airspace or U.S. territorial waters. And I'm wondering, has that debate been settled yet, and what your thoughts are on it?
Yeah, well, clearly, it's to use Attorney General Ashcroft's phrase, it is a blended approach. So we have been very intentional. The U.S. government has been very intentional about pushing out the threats. Obviously, we don't want to have somebody getting on a flight from one of those 275 last points of departure, LPDs we call them, coming to the U.S. with any type of explosive device. So clearly, we have pushed that out. That being said, we have the most control, obviously, over what we have here in the U.S. And we have the best intel about clearly what's going on here. As we get beyond our borders, beyond our shores, we are working in partnership. For example, the Canadians, they have a known trusted traveler program called Nexus. So there's 600,000 Canadian citizens who we made a policy decision to say they would be included in TSA PreCheck because they're known and trusted. They're vetted by the Canadians, who are Five Eyes, obviously. They're vetted by us. So other countries are working on known trusted traveler programs to do some of the things that we're doing here to achieve those goals of pushing out as much as we can and then just clearly communicating on what the latest threats are and ways to mitigate.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Hi, Gary Lauder, Lauder Partners. Since it's very sexy to talk about new technologies and so forth to save lives, but more lives are wasted in terms of you multiply the number of man hours, and man days, years, and so forth. More lives are wasted waiting on TSA lines than are lost to terrorism or other threats. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. The question comes down to how do you decide how much resource to put against the issue of queue management to minimize lines at airports?
So the whole notion of again, of RBS, risk-based security, is how can we address that issue, recognizing there's no perfect solution. The notion that if we had one aircraft with absolutely no security and anybody could get on, there would be some people who would get on that plane, but there wouldn't be any pilots or flight attendants, I can tell you that. So nobody's going to be flying that plane. And then, so what we've been working on is how do we find that best blend, if you will, of what makes sense from the security and passenger throughput. So we watch very closely. I get a weekly list for the wait times at all of our major Category X, the largest 28 airports, in terms of what those wait times are. And the good news is, because of TSA PreCheck, the wait times overall are down. One of the things we have to be very careful about is, as the TSA PreCheck queues are underutilized, so for example, if they're open 18 hours a day, middle of the day, they may not be busy, that we don't have dedicated staff there, which is creating a backlog of people in the regular line. So that's why the whole notion of our risk-based security and TSA PreCheck is to expand that known trusted population to facilitate that, because I know some of you I've talked to have waited in a line at TSA PreCheck, but rarely do you have more than literally a 2 or 3 minute wait. So if you have more than that, I was going to say let me know, but I don't want to know that. So we'll get that. But,
but how long is too long in your view to wait in line at TSA?
So I think most instances, if you're in a large, busy airport and it's they call it the morning bank or afternoon bank, the morning rush hour, just like on roads, I think it's reasonable to expect 10, 15, maybe a 20-minute wait, depending on where you are. Part of it is just
that's acceptable.
That's acceptable given our resources. So if somebody wants to give us, Congress wants to double our resources, and airports have the money to expand checkpoint facilities because we're constrained by what's the physical layout. We don't own that space. Airports provide that space. So there's a number of factors. But I think that's reasonable. But for TSA PreCheck, that is completely unreasonable. So it should be 5 minutes or less for TSA PreCheck.
And for a normal line, after 20 minutes, we should give you a call.
I was going to say that, yeah. But I do get a listing by anything, wait lines longer than 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes is a category, and then anything over 30 minutes. And I have our system administrator who handles all that to follow up with those federal security directors around the country to say what's going on there.
Yes, sir.
Hello, sir. Paul Thompson from Penn State Department of Homeland Security. And by the way, I came here to this conference by train, passed through Washington, Chicago, and Denver, and tremendous vulnerability by the trains. There was no security, nothing. I brought my bags right through the inner city. But I wanted to point out something you should be very proud of and something very positive for the workforce, and that is the associate's degree that your folks are taking in several airports around the country to learn more about the policy and the Organization of Homeland Security, something you should feel really good about.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It is something that I am very proud of, and it is something that several thousand of our security officers have taken advantage of. Thank you for your partnership in doing that. It does give these folks, some of whom have a high school degree, don't have a college degree, many of them, gives them that opportunity to learn more about the broader perspectives, national security, and clearly the mission that we are focused on and this change we're going through, because it is a paradigm change for us. It is, and this announcement I make today, I think will be a game changer down the road. So, but it takes a workforce buy-in to do that, and so the Associates Program is a great way of doing that. Thank you for your support on that.
And with that, John, thank you very much.
All right, Brian, thank you.
And you may do. Yeah, right. Thanks so much. I hope you don't on your calendar.